we're good to go? Okay.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming here, and I'm going to be real fast because we've had some technical difficulties that are already chewing away at our time. We hosted Calico this year, and one of the great things about that is that we could discover young talent. And we were able to actually convince what we thought was the best of Calico to come back to Boulder. So I would like to say a lot more about our guest speaker, but as I said, time is of the essence. So Terri Nelson, PhD from Northwestern University, now at the University of California, San Bernardino, doing awesome things with games. Can I say that word?
Yeah.
And history.
Yeah.
And lots of other neat things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I loved coming to your campus last year. It's just so beautiful, and I did get to see some fall colors this year, so that's just great. And Calico's always been a special place for me, so to be invited back because of the Calico presentation means a lot. So I'm going to talk to you about my project called Occupied Paris. It is, well, you'll see what it is. I call it a virtual learning experience for our techie people or people who want to look at the software. I'm using an open source game platform called Eris. It's free. You go to www.erisgames.org and you can make stuff. It's called a mobile locative gaming system, which is not at all how I use it. Okay, so the way that it was designed is for a couple of things. It's to like you can take people on scavenger hunts, right? And it's based on your device, and it can read the GPS and see where you are. So there's some really cool stuff people are doing with that. And you can also use it. They're using it for some digital collections, like kind of like Backyard Birds Project and things like that. So a lot of people in the sciences are using it and having the students go out and collect data. I'm using it a little bit differently than they designed it for, but it has a lot of features that I like, and it just spoke to me when I first saw it. All of the game interactions, I'm going to show you the different types of things that you can do in Eris. So, you know, there's my project, but you might see some things like, oh, I could do something else with it. And I'm hoping that that's what it inspires you to do, is to find things that you could apply. And a lot of this, what I've done is pretty complex. You can do stuff in about an hour. I teach people Eris workshops, and they can go out and make stuff. So it's real easy. It's real user-friendly. It is Mac only for the apps. Okay, they're working on trying to find somebody to write the Android app, but right now it is Mac only. This is a picture of one of my students in my first beta test. He is a retired school administrator, and he was not very tech comfortable. And yet, I took this picture of him one day as we were working in class, and you can see he's manipulating all of these devices with quite a bit of ease. It does not, the app doesn't work on the laptop. When you're authoring or programming in Eris, you need to be working on a laptop. It doesn't matter what kind of laptop, as long as you've got a browser, you're fine. It works on HTML5, so it's compliant with all of the different browsers. And then it'll play on an iPad or an iPhone. Now, I'm at a small regional comprehensive university. 75% of our students are first generation, really poverty-stricken area. I was really nervous about trying to do this, but we had an iPad card. I thought it'd be fine. Most of my students had iPhones, and they'd rather use their own device, so it was fine. So the project is set in Paris. Eventually, if I get it all done, I'm hoping to have it span the time period from 1939, when war is first declared, up through 1947, which is 2 years post-war. And I chose this time period because it's super, super complicated, and I find it personally really interesting. So I was willing to put the work in to make sure I have it historically accurate, because I find it fascinating. My students are also interested, but it's super complicated for them, and they have a hard time making sense of all of the stuff that's going on. And then I also wanted to talk about it and have students look in really some depth, because I found that they really want to simplify everything. They really like stories that wrap up at the end. They want a story that has good guys and bad guys. And in Paris, when it's Nazi occupied, you have a lot of gray areas. And I think that's the reason that even in France today, it's hard to talk about that. When I went to the Bibliothèque historique de la ville de Paris, and I told them what I was working at, the Historical Library of Paris, and he just kind of gave me a dirty look. It's like, you know, it's okay to research this stuff, but it's just complicated. So if you're not familiar with the time period, we often talk about the three Frances that exist during that time period. We have Charles de Gaulle, who's in England and around in the Francophone colonies, running what they call Free France. And so he's working with Roosevelt and Churchill and the Allied forces, as they thought he was going to be the titular head of Free France, and he had other ideas about that. So he's outside of the country. And then within the country, students usually look at it and say, oh, well, there's the occupied part in yellow on top, and then there's the unoccupied part in the bottom, and the unoccupied part is called Vichy France. Well, actually, Vichy France is all of that, both parts, but the top part has the Nazi forces up through 1942, and after 1942, then they start controlling a lot more on the bottom. So just geographically alone, it's really, really complicated. And then, as I said before, my students, they like things to wrap it up really nicely. You know, we like the Disney films. You know, at the end, everybody lives happily ever after. And when they see movies and they read books, you know, they like it to all wrap up and it's finished. And I have a real hard time with that because they don't understand that when you're looking at history, it's just moving along. It's a continuum. It's not like, you know, oh, it has an end, because then there's the next day. And that's part of the challenge of looking at historical events, is to understand it doesn't just wrap up. I mean, life does go on. So trying to find a way to get them to understand that and think about that, have them have a better or deeper understanding of the acts that are senseless. So in a good story, the bad guys do bad things, and the good guys might suffer, but in the end they'll come out and they'll triumph. Well, in France in that time period, there's sometimes good guys who end up doing bad things and bad guys who do good things, and so it becomes really murky, and it doesn't fit that polar paradigm that they really want to fit everything into. So trying to get them to think with more complexity about what's going on. And then also to understand that they're looking at it from hindsight. We know who wins the war, right? And when you look at it in the time, you don't know that. And then finally, the ethical dilemmas. The students, especially in the typical college age group of, 18 to 24, 25, this is a really important part of their development. It's really, they like to talk about big ideas. This is where you're becoming an adult and you're starting to think about those kinds of things. And maybe you're a little bit idealistic, but that's kind of great. But when you're having challenges handling complexity of thought, then for me it just feels like I can give them a way of practicing this. And maybe failing, maybe being the bad guy, maybe doing these other kinds of things, then maybe when later on, because they've had practice handling complex ideas and complex actions and thinking about that when it comes time to make other kinds of decisions, they have some ability to manipulate and to think about things in complex ways. Because life isn't really simple. And again, they're trying to simplify things. So if we give them chances to practice and to think about that, and then to develop empathy. So my project goals, I know they're really highfalutin, but I'm going to try to show you what I did and how, so I really had to think about what do I want to accomplish, what is it that I'm trying to have happen. So linguistic development in a meaningful setting. We know from the ALTEC standards that we're supposed to give students meaningful context, so they have real language that they're using the target language to share real ideas, important ideas. So giving them that, giving them the deeper understanding of historical events, and fostering critical thinking, and then really thinking about ethical development, and I would even say empathy, trying to teach my students how to have empathy for other cultures, other places, other times. So the game itself is eventually, hopefully, going to have 12 chapters. Each chapter will have some regular requirements, like you have to buy food, you have to go to work to make money, or find other ways of having money. You have to collect information. It has money that they have, so they have to manage their money. They have to manage their safety score. So if you're caught out after curfew, then you lose points, and I'll show you some examples of what can happen to you. That becomes really important. Of course, then post-war, If you ended up with a lot of safety points, then you might be accused of being a collaborator. So, you know, because things shift post-war. They have a health score. So if you don't eat enough food, then you lose health. And then I found out what they really like is they like to have game scores. So I'll show you where I've got game scores in one of them, and I'm going to be working on my other 2 chapters too that I've got done right now to develop out more gaming scores, because that really motivates them. So right now the parts in yellow are what I have. I have done the first run through, first beta test on June 1940. It's when the Nazis invade Paris. Paris was declared an open city. So historical knowledge is their game tactics. I want to get them to learn how to gather information through different media sources. And then their special quest, their sort of dilemma for the chapter is whether to stay in Paris or to leave Paris. December 1940, you'll see quite a bit of examples from that one. That one I've run through twice with 2 different beta test groups. That chapter's on rationing. Usually in a French history course, when we talk about World War II, this is what we say about rationing. There was rationing, and so it was really hard to get food, and if you had cousins in the countryside, it was great because maybe you could have more food. It's about all the time we have in a normal course. This one, my students are spending 3 or 4 weeks just looking at rationing. And then their special quest is to prepare a meal for Christmas. Just the front page on this too. And then the third one that I've got somewhat developed out right now is set in August 1941. This one, some historical knowledge about new events. People are really starting to protest in very visible ways about what's going on in France and in Paris. This is 14 months after the invasion. Game tactics are looking at clandestine newspapers, tracts, posters, those kinds of things. And their special quest is to find some way to engage. And so they have different options of how to engage. Each chapter works independently. Each chapter has tutorial quests to teach the students how to manipulate within the structure of the game. And each one right now scores separately. Ideally, eventually, I'd like to be able to link all of these together so they can, you know, they can track their progress, but not there yet. Like I said, it's a work in progress. So, what is it? It's a role-playing game. The first thing the students do is they have to create their own character. I have a little Google form, and I have them choose their 3 positive traits and their 3 negative traits. And then I give them, like, they have a choice. They have to choose if they're male or female, and then they have to describe their partner, and then they have to decide what their job is. And all of the jobs right now, so that I can keep it simple enough for me to manage, all of the jobs are jobs that earn the average wage in France at that time. So when they go to work, everybody can get the same amount of money. And so the average wage was 1,100 francs a month. And so I have different jobs. And so I provide some vocabulary. And their goal is to keep within the characteristics of their character, the ones that they chose. And if they change, they have to explain why their character changed. I really like using role-playing. I think it's I've just used it a lot in classes, and I find that what really happens is that students both identify with the character, but are also distant. So identifying means that they, you know, they take on and they're like, oh, I did this, this happened to me. But the distance allows them that safety of, if they choose something bad, they didn't do it, the character did. And so that allows them to fail or to be bad or to try on these different aspects without having that reflect upon them personally. And for shy students, you might be very reluctant to talk about themselves in class. When they're role-playing, they're not talking about themselves, they're talking about something different. So it's this weird duality of being both themselves and not themselves that allows them a freedom. So this is when the student found some carte d'identité, filled in, changed some of the information to make this is what his character is. Here's another one. This is an example from another student who she took a carte d'identité and created her character and gave some text information. They posted this. We use Blackboard as our learning management system, so they post these things on Blackboard so that everybody else can see it. And this is the description of her character. Now within ARIS, this is what it looks like in ARIS, the different features that you have. We'll look at each of those in sequence. So it starts with a map. Everything is based off of a map. Mark and I were talking last night as we were driving in about how students don't know how to read maps. They don't know how to read maps anymore. They can use Google or they can use Apple Maps, and they're like in the space, but they're not used to being like the bird hovering over the space. So I think this might be good for them to see. So you can see here, this is not zoomed completely out. You have the choice. It's using Google Maps, so you can look at Street View, which shows you what the buildings are today in Paris, or you can look at Map View, and then each of these little icons I've placed on the map. So when you click on those, it's like you're traveling to that place. Okay? So maps. And then the other feature that I use a lot are quests. So a quest is merely a series of tasks. Okay? So what I love about games is, to students, they think, oh, I'm playing a game, so they just go into game mode, and they don't say, like, well, this isn't how my other teacher used to teach me, or this isn't how, they just go in, oh, it's a game, I know how to play a game, and so they don't think about parts of the game that are really good teaching, like, and good learning, like scaffolding, and this is basically a scaffold, right? So this one is from chapter 3. It has a main quest. You need to make a Christmas dinner, right? And then, well, actually, this one is telling you about what's going on in this chapter. This one's saying you have to make a Christmas dinner. And then this just little one is just about one of the courses during the meal. So in this one, they have to go out and gather food, and they get points based on how many courses they have for their meal. And of course, if you get the stuffed turkey, then you get a whole lot more points than if you end up with, I don't know, rabbit for dinner. So depending on what you're able to manage, then you get points, and they like that. They like, being able to manipulate that. This is their attribute screen. So the hours is just telling you what time of day, because they have to keep track of that for curfew. If they're out after curfew, then they can get punished. Tells you what day of the game it is. This is the first day of the game. It's Wednesday, the 12th of June. This J1 Staff Army, every single day they are required to find out what's going on in the world in this time period. I'll show you what that looks like. The key is just because I've got it locked down so I don't have random people playing the game. So I'll tell you their health score, their security score, and this person has 1 cheese that they bought towards their cheese course. And of course, if you get 3 cheeses, if you can find a camembert, you're really good. Okay. Now, here is an example of an inventory. This is from June 1940. Really super low-level task. And in fact, if you look at the game, what it does is it builds on low-level tasks into more complex tasks. So this is, you've decided to flee Paris. In order to flee Paris, you have to pack your suitcase. Your suitcase is allowed to be, I think it's 15 kilos, and everything weighs a certain amount of, has a weight. So you can choose, and here's some things that you can look, and you can click on it, and some of them you can like take, like I think on the first aid kit you can choose like 3 of them, and you can choose what to pack. And what's interesting is most students packed, like the Parisians packed, they didn't pack food, because you just stop at a restaurant or bakery or something and buy food as you're fleeing the city, and what happened was when they got outside of the city, there is no food, there are no restaurants open. There is an occasion where the students encounter a grocery store and people are looting, and they can choose to loot or not loot. So then when you click on the different items, then you get pictures of it. And the pictures don't correspond with what they're used to. So when they see Avion and they look at that, and then it's a glass bottle, and it just doesn't, that's just weird. It's glass. So those little things help resituate them in time. And they have a lot of conversations and discussions about that. Like, did you see that? That's weird. Or they'll go looking at it. They'll try to check and see if I was right. Shoes, those are funny looking shoes, those kinds of things. So they pack their suitcase. Note taking, you can take notes in ARIS. You can do a bunch of different kinds of notes. So you can do text notes. You can also do audio notes, so I'm hoping eventually to have it where the students actually have to do a recording of themselves saying something. You can do video notes, and then you can take pictures. And so I've had the students, they've used pictures, they'll like pull something up on Google, and then they'll take, like a historical photo, and then they'll take a picture of it, and then they'll incorporate that later in their journal. I have them using quick notes pretty much on ARIS, so like in the game, as they're playing the game, take some notes so they remember what happened, and then they elaborate on it when they go to the learning management system, and then they write their daily diary. That's writing with process, right? You take the notes and then you rewrite later, and then they can comment on each other's, etc. But it has all of those features in it, which is really kind of neat. So you can send students around campus and have them talk about different things as they get to different things. And then you can tag the notes and search them. Here's some examples of what the students wrote. Every day they have every day of the game. They have two different kinds of notes that they have to take. One is for their personal diary, what happened to them and their partner in the game, and their partner being mostly a spouse, okay? Though I let them define that however they want to define that, and they have to deal with the complexity of that on their own. And then they have their news. And so I just copied this. There's errors in there. You make errors when you're trying to work at a higher level. But this allows them to read or listen to something and then say what was going on, and they always have to tell me why they think it's interesting. So they have to situate it. They have to give it a context in terms of the news notes. So for me, what happens is then that the game becomes basically a scaffolded linguistic performance. In some sense, we can call this a game. In another sense, it's really just a multimedia textbook that takes the students through things and certain sequences of actions. And you'll see this as we go through. So we'll see some interpretive, some interpersonal, and some presentational that comes out of it in terms of what they do. Interpretive, historical information. So in-game, they have access to newspapers, they have access to the radio. I found a lot of things out online. I found if they listen to the BBC, which they'll lose some security points if they choose to do that, but they might hear a speech by Winston Churchill. They might hear news going on if they get it from the BBC. If they listen to Radio France, they'll get some nice music, telling all about how the Nazis are winning the war. If they get a news broadcast. So there's a lot of that original material actually out on the web. They might get an extract from, in the game they'll get an extract from a biography or a novel. So just a little piece of text that situates what's going on during that day and around that time frame. Occasionally I'll link to a website. A lot of towns, when I'm doing the one fleeing Paris, a lot of towns actually have stories of what happened in their town, so I'll link to those and they can go and investigate that. And then this is going on, because I was beta testing, I actually have the students use the game in class so that I can see what they're doing. I'm really interested in what are they clicking on, how are they doing things, so I interact with them as they're doing that. And I watch them a lot. Ideally, I'd like this to mostly take place outside of class. In class, we're doing a lot of stuff. It's a 10-week quarter. We covered 3 chapters. We got from 1939 to 1941. We did not finish the war. We had to talk about what happened. They didn't know. They knew that the Allies won, but they weren't really clear on exactly who the Allies were. But we also do things, use documentaries, French documentaries that are available on the web. We use little excerpts from some novels. We watched a couple of feature films. So we had, and then I did some short lectures. We had some discussions, and we talked about things in class. So here's some my students working. And here they are. This says your week is beginning the 12th of June in 1940, and since the 9th of June, Nazi forces are already occupying Rouen. They're heading towards the city. And what happened during this time period was actually that the government declared Paris was an open city, but didn't bother to tell the Parisians. The Parisians had been leaving for weeks. They had trains running 24/7, but on the 12th of June, the trains are blocked, and the students will find that out in the game. So this just gives them an introduction. Again, this gives them some text, something to work with, and some vocabulary. Some other examples of text, little excerpts from books. This is they stop in a little town called Montlévy, and this gives them a little bit of information about where the town is and what the town is known for. Now this is an interaction. Play a little movie here. And you don't actually have to hit on quick travel anywhere. That's from Paris 1. So this is where they go to the kiosk to buy newspaper. And this is them, and you'll click and see this is the 3 newspapers they can choose from. This person chose Le Petit Parisien. This is the interaction with the kiosquier. That means that they received the newspaper in their inventory. It's going to take a second here, because I'm not really good at editing my video clips. And this takes them to Gallica, which is the Bibliothèque Nationale, the National Library of Paris. It takes them to that newspaper for that day. So to them, it feels like they really received the newspaper. Now I could just say, okay, here's a link and go visit. Then it's not fun, right? Oh, in the game you bought this newspaper. Now you can go out and you can actually then look through the newspaper. I tell them how to just copy the link and bring it up. You know, if they're on their iPhone, it's much easier on a laptop to look at the newspaper. They have to find a couple of articles that are interesting to them, and I don't really care which articles. And then they can follow that and see. So there's stories, like, you know, kind of like Dickens stories, right? Where things go on, and it's all about how wonderful everything is. It has like what's going on in the theater and the movies that are playing and the exhibitions, and it has a little bit of stuff about what's happening in terms of the war, but it's always, you know, the Allies are bad, the Germans are winning, you know, those kinds of things. And so it really puts them in that context. Here's some other ones. If they go to their house, they can choose between the BBC and Radio Paris. As I said, if you click on the BBC, it gives you a warning. It says you're going to lose security points if you want to go. And if they choose yes, then they may get a link to a real audio broadcast. And I thought it was like kind of funny. My students came back and they said, Madame, there's a real problem with the audio. Well, what's the problem? Oh, it has all this noise on it. Like, noise? And yeah, like, you know, I'm like, yeah, you know, that's what it sounded like. Like, well, how did people hear? It's like, well, it's called static. And when you got the radio over, you know, just the airwaves, and it's coming from England, and you're living in Paris, kind of far away, and so, you know, that's what you have. Because they don't know. They listen on the internet, everything's beautiful, everything's clear. They didn't know what it was. They thought I had a problem with audio files. And the bottom one, you can see if they click on Radio Paris, this actually is linking to a little video somebody put up, and it has little clips of movies that were shot in Paris during that time frame. Now this might not be exactly December 1940. I'm not too worried. I'm trying to give them some visual information to work with. But the music in the background is a song that was in the top 10 during that time frame. So each time they listen to the music, they get something that's authentic. And so she came up to me and she said, Madame, there is a great singer on there. I said, really? And she said, yes, her name is Edith Piaf, and I really like her. Well, you know, she was really famous. But again, had I said, oh, there's this really important French singer named Edith Piaf, and you know, then it's like, that's not interesting. But this, they really feel like they've discovered it, even though they know that I programmed it. Now here's another example of an interaction. This is going to the butcher shop. And you can see this is on my phone, and so, you know, I can scroll in and click on the butcher shop, and we'll say hello, and I said, well, do you have anything special today? I said, oh, if I only had anything special, you know, with the rationing, everything's really terrible. You know, unless you have cousins in the country, you really can't get anything. And then eventually, the butcher says, you know, if only I had chocolate. You know, I can't even offer my wife any chocolate this year. Now, if you're really smart and you went to this butcher on the right day, and you have this conversation with the butcher, and then you go to the other bakery shop that happens to be run by a Jewish, and there's nothing about there except there's the sign saying that this is a Jewish enterprise, and eventually that's going to be taken over by somebody new when they had spoliation, when they took all the property away from the Jews, so that I'm getting the students to just, like, what do you notice and what do you pay attention to? But if you go to the other bakery and you get chocolate, because there was chocolate available, you can't have hardly any food, but there's chocolate. And then you bring the chocolate back and you give it to the baker or the butcher, you get a roast beef. And roast beef is worth a lot of points. One of the things I found out was asking my students, I said, did you participate in the black market? No, we couldn't find it. They thought the black market was a place. They were looking all around the map to find the black market. It never occurred to me that they would think that. And they were all like, yeah, you can't find it. It's not on there. Did you forget it? I'm like, no. So we had a discussion of what the black market is, that it's a series of transactions that are illegal. It's not a place that you go to. So there's a lot of this stuff going on, which, then they start talking to each other. There's a big thing about the liquor store, because the liquor store is not open very often, and when did you get to the liquor store, and how did you get champagne, and so they start to focus on those little things, and that to them makes it feel like a game. Within the game itself, there's a lot of player agency that just means the students have choice. In one sense, it's really very limited because they'll have an interaction that may have 3 options that you can choose, and then they can, but I've coded out those options. So when I got to the June 1940, because I was working with ARIS and they had undergone a huge revision and the software wasn't stable until February, my class started in April, I was like pushed for time. So on the Fleeing Paris right now, whatever you do, everybody gets pushed eventually to the same track. Eventually I'd like to have it actually have separate tracks, but that's all I can program. That's all I can, so I have a lot of ability as the author to move things, but to them it still feels like it's a lot of freedom and I get to choose and I get to be different. So there's some things you'll see. If you are in the jail, for example, and it is, there's a random structure that I've built in using JavaScript, and so it'll randomly determine if any Germans were attacked the night before. So if you happen to be in prison that night because you were out after curfew and it was multiple times, multiple infractions, there's a risk of dying. So there's a risk of being shot, because that's what happened, is they would take people who were in the jails, and so if somebody was out, if a German soldier was attacked, they would take randomly a certain number of people from the jails and shoot them to try to keep the population. So the students, they catch on to that, and that makes them very cool. So here's an example of what an interaction might look like. That's the head icon. I don't have pictures yet for the different characters. So this one says, you see, this is if you go to the rail station, you say you're going to escape Paris, and you go to the rail station. And you go to the rail station, and you see your boss, and you also see your neighbor. And you can choose who you're going to go and talk to. And if you go and talk to your boss, you can get some information. You'll find out eventually that the trains aren't working. If you go and talk to your neighbor, we had a big fight with your neighbor last week. And so if you go and talk to your neighbor, it's kind of tricky. If you happen to put water in your suitcases and you give your water to your neighbor, then your neighbor will be really happy with you and will give you good information. If you don't have that, then the neighbor is going to mislead you and give you bad information, okay? And this is, because this is the game-like aspect of it. And then we can talk about, because the students keep track of what they do, what do they have in their suitcase, how do they use it, etc. This is some examples from their diaries. So this one, lines, 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 that's all there is right now. What's fun for me looking at this is that's actually what they usually get when they're told about rationing. There was a lot of lines. But this one, they're generating this themselves because they had the experience within the game of doing that. Here you can see Edith Piaf is an incredible singer, and I really like her. Interpersonal skills, it's really important to work with the students, and afterwards they don't just get it because they played the game. There's still a lot of teacher work and learning work that happens. So this was after the chapter. We did the chapter on rationing. So we have a lot of vocabulary for food, politeness, official language versus a spoken language. And each of the food items that they buy, I have it coded for how many calories it is, and then it accumulates the calories over the course of the week, and so the students have to fill out this little form, how many calories do they have in the week. And so we finished that, and they came to class, and I said, okay, so how many calories did you have? Oh, I had about 11,000. Oh, I had 7,000 calories for the week. I said, well, that's for you and your partner. Yeah. So what would be the consequence of that? And then we talk about, how much calories they need. They need 2,400 calories a day for a normal occupation, which is what they have, because they have to walk a lot because, they don't have money for the metro. And they're like, oh yeah, I'd get really skinny. Okay. So I said, well, let's go ahead and look at that. So I had them list all of the food that they bought, and it turns out some of them had ration coupons left over. Like, you didn't buy food? Oh no, I didn't, Well, if you had ration coupons, you would have used them. So they put up their food, and I said, well, any ration coupons you have, you can add the food. And it wasn't until they actually started putting out what they had for breakfast, what they had for lunch, and what they had for dinner, that they realized that they didn't have enough food. They didn't make that connection. So it was the putting it up on the board, talking about, what did you buy, what did I buy, how much food do we have. You can see here they're having, what do they have each meal. And then they started to really think about food and what food meant. I pulled up on the screen the ration chart for how many calories you were allocated depending on what you did. So if you were an expectant mother, you had more calories. If you had a labor-intensive job, you had more calories. So we looked at that, and why would expectant mothers have that, and why would they have this for if you had a hard labor job? And then we looked at old people, and they were allocated 675 calories a day. And Rebecca burst into tears. And she said, they're killing them off. I said, well, why do you think that they would be doing that? And they started talking about, well, maybe they think that old people aren't necessary to society anymore. And then the students on their own started talking about food security and Somalia and other kinds of places. And so we had to really ratchet it down for them to get it, and then they started making those connections to other kinds of things. That's where they're marking up the food. And at the end of each chapter, they had a little worksheet that asked them questions about the chapter. And one of the students wrote, where there's famine, there's no place for education. And in the absence of education, there's no progress. That means the country is susceptible to economic downfall and also open to its enemies. So for me, that was like, wow. They weren't all like this. Okay, it wasn't like this all the time. But you got to get there a couple of times before it becomes a habit. Because critical thinking doesn't, it's not like, oh, you hit the threshold and you're always there. It's kind of like hitting the advanced level. You can go back and forth a long time, but eventually you get it. Affective consequences. One of the things that can happen is you're leaving down to this, you decide to leave Paris, which everybody eventually has to do. When you're on the road, at a certain point, there are planes that come because the Germans actually did strafe the crowd. They did that because they thought that there were maybe French soldiers in there, and also they wanted to create chaos because they didn't want everybody to escape to the south. And I have it randomized, and you can die. So when this happened the first time, and I had presented this thought of just thinking about this, and I presented this at Axel, and people were, the faculty were really split. You can't kill your students. And but I really wanted to. I just really wanted to. So I put it in there, and so we got to this one, and the students are like working, and then all of a sudden Cameron, who's a history major and a gamer, and he's like, I died! I can't believe it, I died! So I, like talked to him, like, how do you feel, and what happened, and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, he was just shocked. He was just shocked that he died. And then I say, Ashley, and Ashley's sitting there, and for the longest time, she's a very tentative student. She just wasn't moving. I mean, she's just like looking at her iPad. Ashley, what's going on? So I can't decide what to do. I said, well, what are your options? We're doing this all the time. What are your options? So I can do this, I can do this. Well, what are the pros and cons of this one? And which pros? Like, well, just decide. And she said, but I don't want to die. And she did about 10 minutes later. If they die, because it's a game, they can play the game again. They can just restart. Or they can accept the consequences of it. I think I'm going to change it in the next version. It's actually going to be their partner dies. So that I can continue on just a little bit longer. But if their option is that if they accept that and decide not to replay the game, they have to write the obituary for their character, and then they have to create a new character. Because they won't have the news diary for the rest of the days after they died, so that's kind of they still have to write things. And that was Cameron. What's really interesting to me is in terms of presentation, the volume of language that's produced. So we have writing in the process, we have the in-game journals, we have the graded journals, we have the post-game surveys, assignments, worksheets, and then they have the final essay and final project. This is, so she was actually in both pilots. And here's what she wrote in April 2014 before she started the first pilot on rationing. The second one, I'm not sure what I think she means walking on eggshells, and I don't know if there's something similar in Spanish because she's still using that next year. And then here's what she wrote in June. Now this is in a worksheet that's about the same length, so it's not about getting it done faster or less fast. It's about the same length, it's about the same place. That question's about the same place in terms of all the questions that are asked. A lot more stuff. Here's another one. Yeah, what was life like during the Alta mission? It was really difficult. And the instructions say, tell me as much as you can. And in fact, in the early ones it says, tell me as much as you can, and if you can no longer express it in French, express it in English. And this is what I got. And then in June, this is what I got. And I think it's because they know better. They have more to say. Here's some examples of things they did with ethical decision making. I asked them every chapter in the worksheet, so everyone in pregame, before they started the game, a friend had asked you to hide him, what challenges does that pose, and what did you decide to do and why? And this is the student who was in both pilots. And in April 2014, she said, I'd hide my friend, what they're doing to the people is unfair. This is very typical. This is what I get from her. Oh yeah, I would hide them. And it asked, what are the challenges? And then in April, still, this is before the game, I would hide them. By June, I'd want to help, but I don't know if I would. It would be considered treason and probably lead to death. And for me, what this is starting to show is an ability to think in complex ways. It's not an easy decision anymore. I don't want to get rid of that idealism. I hope that if there were terrible situations that we would help our friends. But I think it's also important to understand how hard that decision was and how complicated that decision was. Here's another one. This is my student who was a double major, and so he just avoided the question, right? I don't like hypotheticals, they give me a headache. Right? And that's very typical, right? When you're pushing your students both in terms of thinking and linguistically, and they don't want to manage it, you just avoid it. And that's what he did. And then in June, it's not a matter of, you get graded on each, you have to respond, and then you get credit for the assignment. And so here, I'd like to allow my true friends, distinction here, have to be invested, I don't want to put my family at risk, etc. Their final projects are presentations, so that they have to tell the story of their character, and they can do that in any format. They can write a comic book, they can write a story, they can do a PowerPoint, they can sing a song, they can do whatever they wanted to. Most of them just came up and told the story, and then they put in pictures of what they thought it would look like. The very last thing I had them do in the course was getting some feedback, and I asked them what kinds of things did they learn. And so you can see some examples here. I learned that life was very strict. I learned about the harshness of the daily life of average Parisian. The old must have died very rapidly. That's coming right out of that rationing. It's very sad that the occupied had to live that way. How would you describe this class to a friend? This class is very focused and centered on France during World War II. Goes beyond just scratching the surface and really takes you to connect emotionally with the lives of the people. So for me, it felt like a win, because I wanted empathy, which is really hard. I was listening to NPR yesterday. They were talking about millennials and empathy and how there's a real disconnect because of all the screen time, but I really wanted them to connect, to make those connections. And this was typical. I mean, the kinds of things that the students wrote. They talked about that really feeling connected to the people, and I think it came from the role playing. Eventually, what I'd like to do is really love to have a citation index, so depending on what they choose, that I generate some text that appropriate, that relates to a novel, or relates to a movie, or relates to something else. Love to get them to be much more curious about things and to want to go out and do stuff on their own. That may be, just pie in the sky, but I'd like to try it at some point. I have to figure out how to do some other kind of programming. Bibliography. I'm trying to create a way of doing secret letterboxes. So I've got some ideas about how to do that, especially when I get to the resistance chapters, because I need to have places for them to hide things and drop things off. So I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. And then I'd like to have a variety of characters so that they can play a Jewish character, they can play a communist, they can play some of these other roles that have certain things, different things happen to them. And then eventually have them create their own scenarios. So, 20 minutes. That's my project. Questions?
What roles do you have available at the moment?
Right now they can choose, they can be a male character, a female character, and they have, each of those characters has 3 different kinds of jobs, and then they choose their own personality traits.
Right, but you were just saying Jewish, communist. Can you be from Brittany? Can you be from Senegal? Can you be...
I'd like to have all of that built in. Right now the students can add that complexity on their own. I don't have it in the game. I don't have, for example, I'm using Christmas meal. I'm going to have to figure out how to deal with that, because if you're Jewish, you're not going to have a Christmas meal. I don't have that built in yet. It's just another layer of complexity for the programming side.
But you could do that. It's
Absolutely.
Functional, I'll say.
Yeah, because all I'd have to do is set up an attribute that gave that attribute to a character, and then when they have interactions, if they have that attribute, let's say of Jewish, there'd be certain things that they wouldn't be allowed to do.
Sure.
And if they tried to do them so often, I could have them kicked to jail, I could have them picked up.
Right.
There's lots of stuff that could happen.
Okay.
Yeah. With errors, it's a matter of tagging something. And when you have it tagged, like, red, blue, whatever, then you can change the interaction based on the tag, the presence of the tag, or non-presence.
You said you ran 2 pilots?
Yes.
How many students did you have to?
In the first pilot, it was just for Chapter 3. It was my first time doing it, and I had 8 students. In the second time, I had the 3 chapters, and I had 4 students.
What was the biggest change from start to finish whenever you worked with them? What was the biggest change that you saw in their...
How well they connected to things. Something about that rationing chapter, which is the second chapter that we did, and when we had that discussion on food, that really stuck with them. And so they kept referring back to that a lot. Cameron, my double major, he was in a class at the same time. It was a senior thesis class, and he was doing it with a professor that specialized in history in World War II. And he wrote his about, and he sent me a copy of what he wrote in our class. Was all over that paper. It was all over that paper. So there's just this kind of emotional connection that I wasn't getting from the students when we were doing the other, the survey of history kinds of classes, and even the history of Paris, and I was having trouble getting them to, care, And here at the end of the class, they really cared. They really felt personally somehow attached to the time period.
You did great work. I'm just like, wow.
Thank you. Other questions? Really?
you might have addressed this and I missed it, but so can they interact with each other in the game, or is it individual work until you take them out and then?
It's individual work within the game. Error functionality. There are ways of communicating messages, like with the notes and stuff. So you can have public notes and private notes, but they're not interacting in character within the paradigm of Eris. That would be something you'd have to do outside. Or else you give them, if you're doing something and having them work as a group and they have one device as a group. I've seen projects where they send students out for history classes or even language classes, and they have to go investigate and they have to have a certain kind of conversation, and they tape themselves and do that within Eris. But not the way that I've got it structured right now. So we do more of that outside of the game in conversations.
I have to say, this is really, really amazing.
Thank you.
And I was just wondering, is it possible, for us to play it, or can we buy it somewhere?
Oh, no, you can't. No.
You should sell it.
Yeah,
no, really.
No. I'm actually working. I've been working with Carl Blythe, who is at Coral. Do you know Coral? It's University of Texas Austin. It's one of the National Foreign Language Research Centers. They work with open educational resources. So what I'd like to do, I still have some stuff to clean up. It's a working project. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to eventually have. I'm hoping to have rationing available, and I need to find out from the Eris people, how do I do it, so I could put, let's say if you wanted to do it, that I could put you as an editor so that you can have your own names, so your students' notes are mixed up with, other people's students' notes. So I have send me an email and I'll send you a code to get into the game. I do have it, not just general access. I'll give you a code. There's some parts that are rough. I just ask that if you see spelling mistakes, I'm not a non-native speaker. If you see other kinds of things, you let me know. But I'd like eventually, my ideal pie in the sky dream is that we have some sort of sites that people are then using this and creating their own chapters, and that we have some sort of shared network where we can, you know, collaborate and share those things together. I'm a full professor. I'm 8 years out from retirement. I don't care about making money on this. I'm just really excited about what my students can do and love to see other students using it. The teachers find that that's helpful.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's really exciting.
How much does the workload for this for you compare to other methods?
That's what I don't want to know. I spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. A lot of it has been research. I feel I have a personal connection in the family I live with in France. The family is Jewish, and I knew the grandparents, and the grandparents survived the Second World War. The family, the kids their kids, one of my best friends, her name's Dominique, and her parents, she was one of the 2 children born after the war, and there was 2 children